Welcome to Sound Bites, hosted by registered dietitian nutritionist Melissa Joy Dobbins. Let's delve into the science, the psychology, and the strategies behind good food and nutrition.
Hello and welcome back to the Sound Bites podcast. In today's episode, we're going to take a deep dive into the shifting consumer mindset around health and wellness and what this means in terms of how we approach our relationship with our food and our bodies. As the guilt-free RD, my philosophy is to enjoy your food with health in mind. But as you know, this can be more complex than it sounds. So today we're going to dig into some of the emotional and physiological responses connected to eating, including how these responses shape our relationship with food and our bodies, and can promote experiences of joy and satisfaction, which is what eating is all about or should be all about. Today, my guest is Andrea Mathis. She's an Alabama-based registered dietitian nutritionist who is the owner of the nourishing food blogs Beautiful Eats and Things and Little Eats and Things. And she's the author of The Complete Book of Smoothies, 115 Healthy Recipes to Nourish, Heal, and Energize. Andrea believes in achieving optimal health by incorporating healthier eating habits into your lifestyle while learning to appreciate and accept your body in the process. Andrea, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to be speaking with you today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, so before we jump in, I do want to note that this episode is sponsored by Fresh Avocados Love One Today, and we thank them for their continued sponsorship and support of the podcast. Love One Today is a leading source of the healthiest reasons and tastiest ways to enjoy fresh avocados. As a science-based resource, Love One Today provides turnkey solutions that make it easy for health professionals to stay on top of the latest research and confidently recommend avocados. And if you've listened to previous episodes, you know that I've always been a big fan of fresh avocados, and they are particularly relevant for our conversation today because of their nutrient and flavor profile. So we're going to discuss the nutrition and science behind this fruit in the context of satisfied eating. Also, this podcast is eligible for one free continuing education unit through the Commission on Dietetic Registration for registered dietitian nutritionists, dietetic technicians registered, and certified diabetes care and education specialists. You can visit the show notes for this episode or my CEU page at soundbitesrd.com for more information. Now, Andrea, I see that you sometimes go by Andy, so how do you want me to address you?
Oh, you can call me Andy. All my friends call me Andy.
Okay, cool. I love it. So this is your first time on the show, but I've seen you do other events, and I just think you are just so full of joy and energy, positive energy. And so I'm really excited to talk about this really important topic with you today. But first, I would love for you to share more about your background, how you got into dietetics, and what motivated you to come to this field of nutrition?
Sure. Well, a lot of my interest and motivation for becoming a dietitian just kind of came from a few of my personal experiences. It started back in high school when I felt a lot of pressure to fit in and, just look a certain way and be a certain body size. And even at this young age, I started exploring, fat diets, trying to lose weight. And while I was looking at this, I kind of came across the dietetics profession. And also, which was really funny, one of my high school teachers, she was a home ec teacher, and she was a dietitian at the time. And she just kind of told me a little bit more about the dietetics profession and made me realize that there was so much more to nutrition than just weight loss. And so even with that, my focus on weight loss continued. As I got older, and I kind of developed this love-hate relationship with food, so like concepts like moderation is key. I really didn't understand that at the time. Like I love food and I still do, and I ate what tastes good and what looked good and I still do, but I do that with a little bit more of a different approach these days. And like I realized that I had zero knowledge about how to lose weight the right way. And I also had no idea how to maintain a healthy weight and to find balance that made me feel good overall.
Mm-hmm.
So all of this kind of sparked my interest towards becoming a dietitian. And I've been a dietitian for about 11 years now. And I worked in a few different healthcare settings, including clinical, public health, and long-term care. So today, like I share wholesome recipes and body inclusive nutrition advice through my social media channels. And I just try to help others and, just try to encourage others. And this all comes from my personal experiences.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing part of your story.
Sure.
I love that your home ec teacher was a dietitian. That is so cool. And, I can relate to the fact that, even as dietitians, we can have our own struggles with food and nutrition. We're humans, we're people too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you can pull from your personal experiences to support others, that is always very helpful and relatable. Can you talk a little bit more about the challenges or obstacles you faced as a dietitian as you were getting into the field?
Yes. So like on a personal note, like I hit a point to where I realized that many of the weight loss approaches out there, they aren't very helpful and can sometimes be harmful.
Mm.
Like I said, I've always loved food, the way it looks and smells, and of course, how it tastes. So I wanted to regain joy and satisfaction from eating rather than always looking at food through this restrictive diet lens.
Mm-hmm.
So I really worked hard to find that happiness while also being realistic. And that's how I got to where I am today. And I will add that my journey as a dietitian has not been easy. I faced discrimination from clients and also even a few colleagues. Due to my body size, I've had many moments to where I questioned my career path. Like at one point, I considered, choosing a different career path and not being a dietitian because of this. But over the years, I've had several clients share that they could relate to me. And this encouraged me and just reinforced my path as a dietitian. And I recognized that I had valuable things to share that could help others realize that self-love and health and enjoying food is possible.
Wow. Wow. Yeah. Your experiences and perspective are very valuable for the nutrition world. And it's frustrating when people, and I would say, both the public, general public, and health professionals judge a dietitian's worth or efficacy based on their weight. And I've seen it go both ways. Some people feel that dietitians who are not overweight cannot understand or help a person who is in a larger body, and vice versa. If that dietitian is in a larger body, they cannot guide patients appropriately. So it's really frustrating and challenging. A lot of my listeners know that I first became interested in nutrition when I was studying ballet in high school. I didn't know what a dietitian was until college. But when I was in high school, I saw firsthand how unhealthy habits can be detrimental to health and how susceptible we can be to fad diets and misinformation. And so many things in life can have an impact on your relationship with food and your relationship with your body. I feel like it seems like there's been a greater emphasis on health and wellness over the past few years. And, the pandemic certainly brought a lot of this into the spotlight. And it seems like people are being more thoughtful about how they approach nutrition and overall health and wellness. But I'm curious what you've been seeing and hearing with your patients and clients in terms of people's mindsets recently with health and nutrition.
Yes, like I totally agree with you. I think that there has definitely been a shift in the way that people are viewing health and wellness. And it has me feeling a little bit more encouraged. Like I feel like people are really looking at food as a way to, satisfy themselves, as a way to nourish their bodies. And I feel like that is a good direction in which we're going in right now. Also, I saw a recent report from Mintel, which is a global market research firm, that collected insights about health management from 2,000 adults and looked at multiple sources of information to compile its data. The findings showed that today's consumers have started to expand their idea of what a healthy lifestyle looks like, and it's no longer defined by food restriction or those grueling exercise routines. And they're prioritizing health and wellness from the inside out. And what's even more encouraging, or at least in my opinion, is that we're seeing a shift to a more preventative stance on wellness as opposed to like a reactionary approach.
Mm-hmm.
We have seen a gradual shift in this direction over the years, but I think it has certainly accelerated by the pandemic. And people are starting to put greater emphasis on factors such as immune health, improving sleep quality, maintaining energy levels, taking time for themselves, happiness, living longer, relieving stress, and eating healthy. And different generations are prioritizing different factors. And according to the same Mintel report, Gen Z ages 18 to 24 tend to favor happiness and stress relief, while older adults are more motivated by longevity and avoiding common illnesses.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I love to see the emphasis on mind and body, and that people are moving away from restrictive diets or extreme exercise. I find it really interesting what the different generations prioritize. And it does appear that the Gen Z generation really has a strong focus on self-care. My daughter's in that age group. And I feel like, yeah, it's a really positive thing. And whenever I look at like consumer data, weight loss still inevitably comes up as a top motivator for people. So where do you see this fitting in?
Like you said, while the mindsets may be changing, that topic of managing weight is still a priority among consumers. Many people still look at body weight as a motivational factor when it comes to their health, but they are putting greater emphasis on more intrinsic factors like their happiness and managing stress levels and just feeling more confident in their bodies and focusing on small attainable steps to achieve their long-term health goals instead of prioritizing those quick fixes.
Mm-hmm.
So this new lens on wellness kind of leans more towards a sustainable lifestyle that takes both mental and physical health into consideration.
That's great, because that's kind of what dietitians aspired to do from day one, is to help people just kind of have that healthy wellness approach, and then their health outcomes and their weight would fall into place based on that healthy approach. But yeah, no, I love hearing that. And this data, it really lines up with the growing interest around body positivity and this connection between physical and mental health. I saw recently that Google shared that the phrases body positivity and how to maintain mental health were searched online in 2021 more than ever before.
Yes, and those terms alone are so telling about where people's heads are these days. Like as a body inclusive dietitian, I talk a lot about developing body awareness, which includes becoming more in tune with hunger cues and how food makes you feel. So all of this can help shape your relationship with food, your mind, and body. So according to the International Food Information Council, or IFIC, most consumers have some awareness around feeling satisfied from eating and listening to their hunger cues, but about half of Americans report feeling some guilt around the foods they eat or eating when they're stressed. And all this to say that people are making progress on how they approach health and wellness. They're wanting to accept and feel confident in our bodies and make positive and practical choices are all steps in the right direction. But the prevalence of negative feelings around food choices shows that there's still a disconnect and an opportunity to improve for the betterment of overall health.
Absolutely. And becoming more aware of physical and emotional responses connected to eating can help shape a positive relationship with food and body and promote that joy and that satisfaction from eating and support overall well-being. Now, I want to go back to what you said about body awareness and becoming more in tune with hunger cues and how food makes you feel. We've been throwing around the word satisfaction a lot. So there's so much that goes into achieving this. Can you talk more about satisfaction from a physiological standpoint?
Sure. I'll start by saying that satisfaction from eating can be achieved in different ways, and all of it matters. You can feel satisfied after eating because you're physically full. You can also feel satisfied after enjoying a delicious meal with friends or eating something nostalgic. So we'll touch on more of the emotional response a little bit later, but in terms of the physiological response, based on nutrition science and research, we know that foods with fiber, fat, and protein provide satiation, which is the physical feeling of fullness. Fat and protein stimulate hormones that promote satiety, and fat is particularly a potent stimulator of certain satiety hormones, including CCK, PYY, GLP-1. And this is just kind of taking me back to some of those nutrition science classes. In addition, fats and some fibers also slow gastric emptying, or the process of moving food from the stomach to the small intestine, which can contribute to feeling full. Now, for that reason, studies continue to explore how pairing fat and fiber enhance satiety and the feeling of fullness.
Right. So I think that understanding of the physiological process of feeling full is really empowering in terms of making food choices. Now, there aren't a lot of foods that contain both unsaturated fats and fiber. Of course, avocados is at the top of the list, of my list. There's also things like pistachios and chia seeds.
Yeah, you're right about there not being a lot of food that provide the satisfying fat-fiber combination. Avocados are unique because they are a good source of fiber and virtually the only fruit with unsaturated fats. So their mild flavor and creamy texture also makes them easy to incorporate into a variety of dishes. You can, of course, also combine foods like walnuts and pears to get that combination as well.
Right, that's true. Yeah, so we continue to learn more new information about avocados from the research. And I've talked about avocados and satiety on the podcast before. But what can you tell me about the research on this connection between avocados and satiety from the research standpoint?
Well, avocados' fat-fiber combination actually sparked researchers to develop studies on their satiety benefits. For instance, in a clinical trial of 31 healthy adults with overweight and obesity, scientists found that eating a whole avocado as part of a breakfast meal compared to low-fat, high-carbohydrate meal with no avocado suppressed hunger and improved meal satisfaction. And study participants ate 3 different meals on separate occasions. And the meals had a similar number of calories, but varying levels of fat and fiber. And the control meal was higher in carbs, whereas the meals with avocado were higher in fat and fiber. And after eating, the researchers used a tool called visual analog scale to measure each person's satiety for the next 6 hours. And this tool asks questions about feelings of fullness, hunger, desire to eat, and prospective consumption. And researchers found that having a higher level of fat in the meal was associated with subjects feeling more satisfied, whereas increasing the avocado-derived fat and fiber combination offers additional satiety-inducing benefits. The Avocado Nutrition Center funded this study, and although more research is needed to generalize the results to all people, the findings support the growing body of evidence connecting eating avocados to a positive impact on appetite management and satiety or feeling satisfied. Okay, so what does this all mean? So feeling satisfied helps in managing hunger cues throughout the day to keep your body adequately fueled. And this satisfaction factor is so important because after all, we should be enjoying food. And when it's enjoyable, you're most likely to stick to that eating pattern, which includes more nutrient-dense foods that can support your overall health.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. I love to hear about the research. I always find it so interesting. And of course, it helps me love avocados even more than I already do. Now, you mentioned the importance of managing hunger cues, and I want to come back to that in a bit. But first, can you talk about our emotional responses to eating, especially in light of the data you shared earlier about feeling guilty about food choices?
Yes, physical and emotional responses around food and eating can be so complex and are different for everyone. Eating can invoke all kinds of emotions, ranging from positive to neutral to negative, and these responses can have a significant impact on our relationship with food and our bodies, and in turn can have an impact on our overall health. Food can bring us joy and pleasure when something tastes good or when it's associated with a special memory, but for some, food can also invoke feelings of guilt or shame, especially when certain labels are put on it, or when someone doesn't have awareness of hunger and satiety cues, or how food can impact their health. Our relationship with food is dependent on so many factors. So as dietitians, it's important to help our clients recognize these responses and discover a non-judgmental mindset that can help to support them in their health journey, while also promoting a more positive relationship with food and their bodies.
I agree 100%. Now, are there any specific suggestions or approaches that you've used that can help someone address physical and emotional responses to food with that goal of improving their relationship with food and body. I know, we're talking about this and it's easy to kind of stay top line with it, but I would really love, because you're the expert in this area, so I would love to hear any specific suggestions.
Sure. I think before I dive into an approach, let's take a step back and first start to think about what can this look like in practice. Now, this could be feeling confident in deciding to eat a slice of birthday cake with family and enjoying the moment without any guilt associated with that choice, or choosing to listen to those satiety signals when eating at a restaurant and packing up any leftover food to eat at a later time. So honoring your body and taking manageable steps, both big and small, to feeling your best can help to support a positive mindset and overall well-being. So this isn't an easy journey. Like, it takes work, but one approach that I can suggest as a starting point, and even like for myself, is mindful eating. So what is mindful eating? It's a non-judgmental, non-diet approach to food that focuses on individuals' sensual awareness of food, their experience of the food, and better connection to their mind and bodies. And mindfulness is actually a process-oriented rather than outcome-driven behavior. And this approach has little to do with intake goals around those calories, carbs, fat, or protein. And the purpose of mindful eating is not to lose weight. However, as we know, secondary outcomes like weight loss can result from a change in eating habits or lifestyle factors. But for our discussion today, I want to focus on how we can use it to support people in developing an eating pattern that promotes enjoyment and health.
Right. And I agree. I've experimented with mindful eating myself, and I have found it to be helpful. Just like being mindful with any behavior or habit, it really helps take you off of that, autopilot and makes you slow down and pay attention to what you are feeling and what you're doing in the moment. And I'm a process-oriented person, so I'd be a little bit better at mindful eating. But you're right, it does take practice and it takes work. So for our listeners and maybe perhaps some of the dietitians tuning in, can you talk a little bit more about what this looks like in practice?
So it's really about focusing on your awareness and experience with food and becoming aware of the positive and nurturing opportunities that are available from food. So this involves acknowledging that there is no right or wrong way to eat. And we need to look at food from a neutral lens. Now, all foods have value, but not all foods provide the same nutritional value or elicit the same emotional response. So for instance, some foods like fresh avocados and whole grains provide beneficial nutrients for your body that support your health and also provide enjoyment and satisfaction. And other foods like some desserts or fried foods can provide pleasure and be satisfying in a different way, but don't necessarily support health in the same way as nutrient-dense foods. So being able to recognize the value of foods across the spectrum can help someone make progress on their relationship with food, find a balance of foods that works for their body, and get closer to enjoyment and satisfaction from eating. So in terms of focusing on the experience of food, this includes getting in tune with our body's hunger and satiety cues. We talked earlier about the feeling of physical fullness after eating. And we know that when we're hungry, our stomach tends to grumble, and this is something that we've all experienced. But other hunger cues can include the inability to focus, feeling lightheaded or shaky, or having low energy levels or a headache. Using these cues, we can begin to recognize when we eat for true hunger versus reasons such as emotions. And this practice allows us to develop an awareness of the triggers that can drive the desire to eat, even when true hunger isn't present. And it can also help with understanding how food affects mood and energy throughout the day, and what foods keep your body going at its best for work, movement, and other activities. And having greater awareness of your body may help some people to have more acceptance of their body.
Really good point. And I'm glad you mentioned hunger cues to look for beyond the stomach, growling. And this is something I struggle with personally. And so I'm assuming others do as well. when you're trying to be more mindful, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, I've shared a little bit about my menopause weight experience, if you will. I was just trying to be more aware of hunger levels. It helped me, but it was also challenging because I don't really notice those other hunger cues that you mentioned. And I would wait for the stomach growling. So I would end up going a really long time between meals, or I would just eat at mealtime because it was time to eat. Can you say a little bit more about how to get in touch with those other hunger cues?
Sure. And it can be really challenging and it's different for everyone. So for me, when I was younger, I was taught not to listen to my hunger cues. In my weight loss mindset, I taught myself to ignore when I was feeling hungry because I believed that I had already had enough to eat. So I had to relearn these cues and then relearn how to give myself permission to eat when I was hungry. And I had to realize that it was okay to go back for another portion of chicken if I was still hungry. And I know this experience and behavior is not just unique to me. And what I found helpful is consciously pausing and removing distractions and evaluating how I feel. And some of us get caught up in emotions that come up throughout the day. There's stress or maybe excitement from work or family stuff. And all of those emotions can be distracting. And I found that I need to consciously pause and assess how I'm feeling. And one thing that may work is to keep a journal of how you feel in different situations, how you were feeling or who you were with or what you ate, etc. This can help you identify hunger cues over time. And the key there is over time. Just like any habit, it takes time to rewire your brain to think differently.
Right. That's a really good point. I think sometimes when we think about emotional eating, we think about like it's just the stress and it's just the negative stuff, but excitement and good stuff, emotions can also, like you said, they can be distracting. There's so many nuances here, but this is really helpful, what you're saying. And I think it's really easy to be on autopilot when it comes to eating. Like there's a lot of decisions we make every day and we can't just constantly be, focused on every little thing. We do need to have some sort of routine. So it can be a real challenge when people are first really trying to be mindful about their eating.
Yes.
Is there anything you suggest to help people stay focused while they're learning this habit and training this muscle?
Yes, that's a great question. So a few things I recommend. First, I would suggest to walk away from or turn off electronics. This is often the biggest source of distraction. And then next, I would suggest to start being mindful at one meal a day. This takes some pressure off from being mindful at all eating occasions and keeps your time focused. And another one I would suggest is to commit to just a few minutes. Sometimes it can feel like a lot of work when you have a busy schedule. And giving yourself just a few minutes each day to dedicate to this practice can be extremely helpful. Another one is to consciously evaluate where your mind is at. When it wanders, bring it back to the present moment. And then last but not least, try eating in a new setting. Sit somewhere other than your desk or your kitchen table, and maybe try sitting on a patio or a different room in your house.
Oh, those are really great tips. And a lot of this, as we've talked, it seems simple and common sense, but these are the little nuancey things that we need to think about in order to keep moving forward with that mindfulness. Earlier, you mentioned our emotions, which can have an impact on eating. So I want to go back to that a little bit. We've all heard that phrase, emotional eating. Can you talk more about how this impacts eating behaviors?
Yes, emotional eating is usually casted in a negative light, but what it means is eating food for comfort or reasons other than physical hunger. So stress, anxiety, and sadness are all emotions that can trigger someone to eat outside of hunger. But so can family gatherings or birthday parties where there are societal expectations to eat or where eating is part of the happy, joyous moment. So emotional eating isn't always a bad thing. Fulfilling these emotions is a part of life. However, if emotionally driven eating is becoming a regular habit, it's important that it be recognized and addressed. And going back to listening to hunger cues, these emotions can distract us from recognizing physical hunger. That's where the mindful eating approach can be helpful, giving yourself a moment to evaluate how you're feeling and assess hunger.
Right. Thanks. Yeah. So this is another area that I was surprised to learn and explore further myself. I knew I was not an emotional stress eater in general. So I didn't think too much about how feelings could be impacting my food choices and eating habits overall. But I recently did some work with a dietitian to assess my personality traits and habits.
Mhm.
And her assessment confirmed that emotional eating is not a common issue for me, but it also revealed some behaviors and feelings that can present themselves, including things like self-scrutinizing, procrastination, people-pleasing, moving at a fast pace, being an overachiever, having some self-doubt. These small but significant thoughts and behaviors can add up and can impact my eating habits without me even being aware of it.
Oh, wow. That is really interesting.
Yeah. So I know that you mentioned that mindful eating isn't driven by outcomes, but are there any other benefits associated with this approach?
Great question. So we all know about mindful eating, but the field of mindful eating still remains in the early stages of research. So whether mindfulness is the mechanism by which mindfulness interventions work remains to be determined, but the evidence we have to date is encouraging. Digestion could be impacted if you're focusing on eating and slowing down.
Mm,
Some research has shown that when our attention is not focused on eating, our digestive process is 30 to 40% less effective than it should be,
mm,
which can lead to gas and bloating and discomfort.
mhm.
And mindfulness techniques have been associated with less emotional driven eating because you're becoming more in tune with your physical hunger cues and your emotions related to eating.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And earlier you shared some of your journey to becoming a dietitian and some of the struggles that you experienced personally along the way.
Mhm.
So I'm curious how some of this has come to life for you and how you've regained joy and satisfaction from eating.
Well, a really important thing that I learned is that long term changes do not happen overnight, but the effort is definitely worth it.
Mm,
It takes time and is honestly a constant work in process, and that's okay. Some people feel like diets are, in a way, easier than mindful eating because there are rules and foods to avoid that helps to make fewer decisions.
mhm,
But as we know, these diets don't do much to support our mental and emotional state and can often do more damage. And I came across this realization myself, and I like to remind people that an approach like mindful eating is an approach that supports mind and body. And that has benefits in the long term.
mhm,
And I've also learned a lot from my kids and my interactions with them. Like they're so good at listening to their hunger cues. They tell me when they're full or when they want more of a certain food. And I often save their leftovers with their name on it. Like I'll put it in the fridge
mhm,
for them later on so that they'll know that it's there. So if they're hungry later on, they can just go right back to it and just enjoy that food a little bit later.
mm.
And they really listen to their bodies. And as a parent, I want to model that behavior and do as much as I can to help shape a positive, healthy mindset.
Yeah, that's a really, really great example. I have similar experiences with my kids being in touch with their hunger. And even myself regarding leftovers is kind of a funny story. But again, this seems so simple, but I had been living on my own at college for years before I realized I was eating more than I wanted or needed. Because when I was growing up, I learned that my brothers would eat any leftovers they could get their hands on. So I really think it's a game changer to have like a family agreement that if someone's name is on that food, it's off limits to everyone else. And yeah, these are the nuances, like I said, until you really think about some of these things, it can kind of fly under the radar and it may not be something really obvious, but as you become more mindful and you go through this process,
Hmm.
you have these really kind of cool discoveries along the way. So, Andy, I always like to share some actionable tips with my listeners. So, alongside practicing mindful eating, what are some tips that you can share to help us experience more joy and satisfaction from eating?
Okay, I love this question because I have so many. So the first would be to allow yourself to eat the foods you enjoy. So deprivation is not the answer and it is not sustainable in the long run. Restricting your body from foods you enjoy also isn't the way to show love for yourself. We should also try to leave perfection and the food rules behind. I mean, let's face it, Curveballs are constantly thrown our way, and we have to have a flexible mindset when it comes to food, and it can help to reduce our stress and negative feelings towards eating. Get creative and try new foods or cuisines. I love to experiment in the kitchen, and I found that it can be a great way to spend time with others, time with your kids, and appreciate food in a different way. So, for instance, I recently made pesto BLT stuffed avocados, and they were delicious. They contained several different ingredients. Of course, avocados, turkey bacon, pesto for flavoring. It was so much flavor, which made this such an incredible dish. Not only was it delicious, but it broke me out of my weekly meal pattern. And another dish included this chicken basil whole wheat pasta recipe, and it contained several different ingredients: whole wheat pasta for fiber, the chicken for the protein, a nice vinaigrette for flavor. It was such a great dish, and my family enjoyed that one as well. Don't try to do everything at once. Take manageable steps to feel your best and support a positive mindset. And then lastly, respect your body. Healthy does not have a certain look, and all bodies aren't meant to look the same. So learning to have more awareness of your body and taking steps to honor it is an expression of self-love.
Oh, those are all really great tips, and some I am definitely going to try for myself. And for anyone that wants that pesto BLT stuffed avocado recipe, I will be sure to share the link in my show notes at soundbitesrd.com, because that's from the Love One Today website, right?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. Well, all in all, this conversation is just reminding me how complex health and nutrition are. We've touched on one piece today, but there are so many other factors like sleep, movement, social connection, and this all plays into well-being. And I recently sat down with Dr. David Sadger to discuss these components. So I recommend checking out that podcast episode. If you haven't already, it's number 209. But Andy, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you so much for an insightful conversation.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. I enjoyed talking with you and just sharing some things that I was passionate about. And also, I'm just such a huge fan of your podcast. So thank you.
Thank you. That's so sweet. And for everybody listening, as a reminder, all the links to the research, recipes, and resources that we touched on today will be available in the show notes. And you can find those by going to soundbitesrd.com, or also through any podcast app or platform where you access your podcasts. So don't forget, this episode is eligible for one free continuing education unit through the Commission on Dietetic Registration for registered dietitian nutritionists, dietetic technicians registered, and certified diabetes care and education specialists. So visit the show notes for this episode or my CEU page at soundbitesrd.com for more information. And be sure to check out the Health Professional tab on loveonetoday.com, where you can find the latest avocado nutrition research, free educational materials, as well as a collection of delicious and easy to make recipes that everyone will enjoy. Thank you again, Andy, for being on the show. And thank you to everybody for tuning in. And thank you to Fresh Avocados Love One Today for sponsoring and supporting this podcast. And for everybody listening, as always, enjoy your food with health in mind. Till next time.
For more information, visit soundbitesrd.com. Music by Dave Burke, produced by Jag in Detroit Podcasts.